one note. It's just moving one note, but it opens up for so many things. Now, if you're already busy learning jazz guitar, then I'm sure you know that chromatic notes are a huge part of that sound in licks like this. And I'm sure you're checking out Barry Harris' amazing system for adding chromatic notes and hopefully not wasting too much time on bebop scales. But you can also use chromatic notes and phrases in chords, which is a fantastic sound. And it isn't that complicated or difficult, but nobody seems to talk about it for some reason. Let's start with a very simple example using shell voicings and then expand on it from there. The first version focuses on the tonic chord C major 7 and the fact that you can freely switch between C major 7 and C6. It's pretty simple. The D minor 7 and G7 chord voicings don't really need any explanation. And as you can see, I start on the C major 7 like this. And then I'm moving the 7th, the B, down to the 6th, the A, and then adding that half step in between. It's simple and you can do a lot with this, and there are similar concepts for other chords and also other notes in the chords as well. Some of these will require a few Ted Greene tricks or even a bit of Hendrix technique, but it's definitely worth it. The first C major 7 example is also really useful for vamps in a Latin feel. Here I'm not using the chromatic note, but it still sounds great. If you add the alternating bass line, you make it a great groove and a finger independence exercise, and those are always good to have. And if you want a bit more color, then add the 9th on top, making it an even more challenging finger independence workout. As you can tell, this is useful for a lot more things than just swing comping and chord melody, and we're just getting started. Just to keep it complete, you can of course do the same thing with the other shell voicing. So a 2-5-1 could be something like this. But let's try another common C major 7 voicing with more notes. It's important to be practical when it comes to jazz chords on the guitar. Go with what works and don't obsess about unpractical fingerings. You'll end up wasting your time. This example demonstrates that by pretending to sustain all the notes. So here's the trick. In the first example, I could keep the chord sounding while I moved down the 7th to the 6th. But here I have to let go of the lowest note C when I want to play the A as well, because I need to do this. So what I do is that I'm first playing the chord, then playing the B flat, and then when I'm playing the A, I just gently play the C again to pretend that it was ringing all along. So this is a trick, but it does work, and some of Ted Greene's more unusual fingerings work for this as well. Now, the way I learned this originally was sort of a variation of chromatic voice leading that I learned the first time I went to a Barry Harris piano masterclass. But I'll also return to that because that's a more complicated application. Until now, you've only seen examples on the major 7 chord, but of course, this works for a lot of other chords as well. Here are a few examples for dominant chords. The first one is a chromatic run from the 13th down to the 5th. But instead of moving from E down to D on the G7, you can also move from the 9th down to the root. And this one also shows the reversed version of the major 7 move that I started with. And this type of movement can of course also be added to the altered dominance. Here is an altered example of moving the sharp 9 down to the flat 9 on a G7. And I combine it with a great way to have the major 7 in the melody on the C major 7. I'll also show you a Hendrix variation of that chord. Now here you have the G7 altered with the sharp 9, which of course is moving down from the B flat to the A flat, which is the flat 9, and then back up to the B flat to resolve to C major 7 with the B in the melody. And I'm playing that like this which is really just a regular C major 7 voicing, but then my index finger is coming across here and also fretting the B on the high E string, giving me this. You can also use your thumb for the bass note, so this C major 7 voicing, and that's similar to how Jimi Hendrix approached a lot of chords, and it frees up other fingers to play other things, so I'm sure you can see how that can be a very powerful thing to do. Let's look at Ted Greene's trick and a practical way to add a bit of chromatic movement to a minor 7 chord. The most common minor 7 chord voicings with the bass notes are a bit tricky to add chromatic melodies to, but one very common melody that is easy to play is this one, and in this example you will also see a solution for a C6 chord that is almost straight out of a Ted Greene book. Moving down the 11th to the 3rd on a minor 7 chord, like I'm doing on that E minor 7, is such a classic bebop melody, so that's a very useful one to have in there. And like this, I think you can see that it's pretty easy to play. The A7 and D minor 7 and G7 examples are really something you've seen before, but the C6-9 is a bit different. So here I'm playing it like this, where I'm barring the 2nd fret with my 2nd finger, which is also making it possible for me to play that chromatic melody that moves from D down to C like this. I learned to use fingerings like these from playing Ted Greene exercises. I don't remember him using chromatic notes in this way, but he did this to sustain some notes while moving others in a voicing. It takes a bit of getting used to, but it's far from impossible, and it's always good to be a bit flexible with how you play chords, and if you get options like this, then it's definitely worth it. Let's move to voicings where this is easier. You can even start adding movement in several layers, which will also kind of lead to how I originally learned this from Barry Harris. Finding easily playable solutions for these small fills is not always possible. Take this example. Here it's tricky to find a way to add that major 7 to 6 movement on the C major 7. But if you play them as rootless voicings, then this is a lot easier because you free up a finger. That also makes it easy to add some movement to this D minor 7, where moving the 9th down to the root becomes really simple. Notice that the major 7 chord phrase also becomes easier. In many cases you can still get away with using this in a solo setting. You don't always have to play complete voicings. And another trick that you can use is to add complete sounding voicings on the heavy beats and then put these in between. Here I'm mixing material from the last 2 examples with some complete voicings. So first I'm playing the D minor 7 shell voicing just to have sort of a complete picture of the harmony. Then the rootless phrase, moving to the G7 with a flat 13, which is also played rootless, and then resolves to a C major 7 with a 9, and then I follow that up with the rootless version of moving the 7th to the 6th up here. This way of comping is anyway a great and flexible way to play if you have to cover everything behind a soloist or if you're playing solo guitar. This was one of the biggest things that I learned about chords from Barry Harris. It really opened my eyes to another way to think about it. When I visited the Royal Conservatory in The Hague for the first time to attend a week of Barry Harris masterclasses, I had no idea that I would walk away with a very different perspective on what to practice and a lot of new discoveries that I could use in my playing. It was pretty difficult for an inexperienced guitarist like me to follow what was being taught in the piano masterclasses in the evening, mainly because I often didn't know the songs being discussed, but it turns out that I could luckily recognize drop 2 voicings. Now one evening Barry stopped whoever was playing and demonstrated a technique he said all piano players should use on the tonic chords. He then played this for a C major 7 chord. After playing it, he explained how it works by showing us that the first chord was a C major 7 with the 9th, and then the 9th and the 7th move down in half steps to the root and the 6. So, and it's worth noticing, it's maybe not super relevant for anybody else, but for guitar players it's nice to know that that middle chord is in fact a diminished chord. And then that repeats down here, and the same two notes, the 7 and the 9, are moving down through a diminished chord to the 6 and the root. On piano you can do this while sustaining the other notes in the chord. That's not really practical on guitar, but it's still a great sound that you can use for rhythmic fills and riffs in your comping or chord melody. Check out how it sounds on 251. And I'm sure you can hear how that is much more interesting than just playing the same chord with that rhythm. And of course, you don't have to play the whole thing all the time. They split up as well. For this example, you can also see how I'm using a rootless G7 voicing. To get material like this into your playing, you want to make sure that you're practicing chords and comping in the right way. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to use it. And that is what I talk about in this video, with 3 exercises that are often a bit overlooked, but that will really help you level up your comping and help you learn new things in a practical and efficient way. And it's not just practicing inversions. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.